you've had a lot of experience with the operation.
This is The Way to Go. Today's guests on The Way to Go are Reverend William A. Jones, pastor of Bethany Baptist Church and president of the National Black Pastors Conference, and Reverend Darrell George, assistant to the pastor, Bethany Baptist Church. Your host on The Way to Go is Dr. James P. Carse, professor of religion at New York University. Dr. Carse.
One of the best-known lines in the gospel is the injunction of Jesus to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and unto God what is God's. Now, many Christians have taken this injunction to mean that they should separate, make a very, very clear distinction between the economic and social aspect of their lives and the spiritual aspect. What happens in one area really shouldn't have any effect or any importance to what happens in the other area. However, many other Christians have taken a subtler view that what happens in the one area does, in fact, have an important impact on the other, that where social and economic justice or injustice occur, there are often very important spiritual consequences. My guests this morning are two men who take the subtler view of that issue, who are addressing in a very important way in our time some of the social and economic issues by way of their church. And their church is Bethany Baptist Church in Brooklyn, a very important New York church. And I'm delighted to welcome Dr. William Jones, pastor of the church, and Reverend Darrell George to the program this morning. Delighted to have both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
First, I should congratulate both of you on the centennial celebration of the church. It's 100 years old. And it might be appropriate, therefore, to ask you, Dr. Jones, if you would give us a kind of brief history of that important church.
Bethany began in the year 1883 as a result of a prayer meeting in a small home on Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn. It's interesting that this took place just a few years on the bright side of slavery. And for the past 100 years, Bethany has sought to witness to the Brooklyn community, particularly the black Brooklyn community. Bethany was the first congregation of color to locate at what is commonly called Bedford-Stuyvesant. The congregation moved to its present site in the year 1923. So we've had a rather glorious history, and we have always sought to minister to the totality of human need.
You have visited the church. It's a very beautiful structure, and it's relatively new. It was built.
We constructed that edifice 18 years ago. Then it cost $1,250,000, and we liquidated the mortgage 5 years ahead of schedule.
Yes, it's very, very, very impressive. One of the projects of the church that's gotten a lot of attention recently is a very unique operation, I think, and that is the establishment of a restaurant, Harvest Manor, you've called it. How did that come to be?
Well, that is a very interesting development. In a nutshell, Harvest Manor is the result of an unscheduled right turn on St. John's Place in Brooklyn one Sunday morning, a little better than a year ago. Through the years, I had followed a definite route to Bethany Church for our early worship service, but on that particular Sunday morning, for some inexplicable reason, at least at the human level, I made a right turn on St. John's Place and came to this property that had no for sale sign on it, but I stopped my car, and a fellow who was somewhat inebriated hollered out, "Hey," and said, "Wait for me." And he came up to the car, and he said, "Are you interested in that place?" I said, "Yes." I said, "What do you know about it?" He said, "I don't know anything about it." I said, "But I do know somebody who knows something about it." He took me across the street and rang the bell of the apartment superintendent. Turned out that he knew little about it, except for the fact that it was a former E&P and had been gutted by fire. To make a long story short, the next day I called a realtor friend who tracked the ownership. And on Thursday of that week, I stood on the sidewalk outside and negotiated the purchase price with the owner, went to my congregation the next Sunday and told them what I wanted to do, and they unanimously and enthusiastically accepted the idea and gave me carte blanche authority to proceed.
Well, I must say, I visited the restaurant also. It's really an impressive establishment. It seats how many people?
Well, the cafeteria seats 212, and we can go up to nearly 1,000 for banquet purposes. We have a total of 20,000 square feet. One of the interesting things is that the members of this congregation did this without going to any outside institution for financial help. We raised nearly $1 million in a 10-month period for that project.
For heaven's sake! Now, Reverend George, I know you've been working closely with the development of the restaurant and the staff there, very large staff. Tell us something about your work there.
My mission at Harvest Manor is to assist the development in terms of relating to the general public as they come to the restaurant, and assisting Mrs. Faye Fowler, who is the general manager. Mrs. Fowler is responsible for supervising 45 persons at Harvest Manor when we initially opened. At present, we have 76 persons who are working at Harvest Manor. It's a ray of hope in a rather dim economic time. It's a place not only for a cafeteria and banquet setting, but it's also a well where the classes and masses can come together and drink from the same precious fountain.
And part of the reason, I mean, the church doesn't want to go into the restaurant business. I mean, the real reason behind this or one of the reasons is to provide employment for people in the area, a place to gather. I mean, I thought one of the really attractive features of the restaurant was the atmosphere, the sort of friendly, open.
A sense of community.
A sense of community is
One
really
of the goals
really
of the church is to be a community in itself, a community of faith. It's an opportunity where persons can come together collectively and dine in a fine setting and eat meals at a reasonable cost. And it's also a demonstration of self-help. That is, God helps those who help themselves. And our church has celebrated this effort.
Yeah, one of the things that we've sought to do is to make Harvest Manor a meeting place for people from every social and economic stratum. For that reason, we gave it a second name. It is also known as the Gathering Place. And,
right.
If one goes there and sits for a while, one is subject to see judges, lawyers, doctors, domestics. It's a place where the PhD and the no-D can sit in close proximity without either being offended.
That's very nice. But does the church have other plans for similar kinds of projects in the neighborhood?
We're open to whatever needs exist or whatever needs present themselves. You mentioned earlier this business of the church going into the restaurant business just for that purpose per se. We have no desire to compete with existing economic entities in the black community. The Harvest Manor concept was appealing for the simple reason that no similar facility existed. And this has been the tragic reality for far too long in Brooklyn, which has one of the largest black population concentrations in the nation.
And so you would apply the same principle to other important institutions?
Absolutely.
For
medical
example,
care? Oh, yes. One of the great needs is that of pharmacy, where people can get their prescriptions filled without any fear of being gouged. You know, a lot of money is spent for medication
For sure.
throughout the community.
I could imagine theological objections being raised. People might say that the church has very little business engaging that directly in the economic and social order, that it's okay to sort of spread opinions and to awaken people to the economic realities, but actually to participate in the process is overstepping the bounds of the gospel. But obviously you feel yourselves warranted by the gospel in doing
Oh,
that.
yes. I feel sorry for any Christian who embraces such a limited concept of the gospel. My theology is basically one of holism. I don't think that any segment of turf is off limits to the gospel witness. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and all they that dwell therein. Even heaven and hell are on the same continuum. Heaven represents ultimate positive spirituality. Hell is negative spirituality in the ultimate sense. You know, the parable of Lazarus and Dives. Dives lifted up his eyes in hell and saw Lazarus in the bosom of Abraham. So these two opposite ends of eternity are in view of one another, which means that they are really on the same continuum. So God is concerned, I believe, and I think the church ought to be concerned with the totality of existence.
Well, I visited the church, and I found that the spiritual quality, the religious quality of the service is, of course, remarkable. But to combine that with a sort of social witness, I think, is really the important distinguishing feature of the church.
Yeah, I see no dichotomy between the two. Whatever we do in terms of social economic outreach is a natural extension of the gospel witness. If, for example, we show up on a picket line, incidentally, I once led a picket line in front of the A&P supermarket that is now Harvest Manor. But whenever we engage in that kind of action, we are doing it because Jesus himself elected not to show up. We, showed up in his place.
Right. You currently are conducting an action, or you're in a negotiation, I think, with the Daily News. Is that right? I think Reverend George, you're involved in that.
That
discussion.
is correct. I'm assisting Dr. Jones, as well as participating with the Organization of Afro-American Clergy, as we are negotiating with the Daily News regarding some very serious matters.
What are some of the details of those negotiations?
Dr. Jones is in charge of those negotiations, and he might best speak on that.
Well, we are concerned about helping the Daily News establish a just and proper relationship with the black community of this city. Blacks represent a significant share of the Daily News readership, and we're just concerned about equity with respect to all of their operations, equity in employment, equity with respect to their banking situation, the use of minority entrepreneurs, service contracts with black vendors. Whatever they do, we just want
How about also the content of the newspaper? Are you interested in that issue?
We're very
Certainly,
much
yes.
concerned
Yeah.
about that, too. In fact, the gentleman who heads the whole editorial setup for the Daily News is an integral part of the negotiations.
Dr. Jones, while the development of the restaurant and the church's social action activities are in many ways unique for churches in the New York area, the churches anywhere, they're certainly not unique in your life. You've had a long history of speaking out and taking public positions on important issues. In fact, you were in the leadership of Operation Breadbasket, as I recall.
I was national chairman at one time. Yes.
What was that program? Many viewers probably have forgotten that.
Well, Operation Breadbasket was concerned essentially with the kinds of things that I mentioned regarding the daily news. We confronted major corporations in the name of the Lord, and we sought to negotiate a just relationship between that company and the black community. And if that did not pan out properly, then we went the route of boycott. We made black dollars off limits to those concerns. We operated on the basic premise that to cooperate with an evil establishment was tantamount to the worst kind of sin. And we did not want our appetites to ever get in the way of our values. So it was essentially, a very Christian movement. And it's regrettable that it sort of petered out with the downward spiral that SCLC found itself in at one time. But this kind of thing is emerging again.
I was going to ask you that, as a matter of fact, because there's been a lot of talk in recent years about the sort of lack of social public conscience in the civil rights movement and other kinds of public issues, protests of various kinds that were very popular in the 60s and early 70s. Do you see a kind of return to that currently?
Yes, I think that Reaganism is certainly tantamount to recidivism, and Mr. Reagan and his cohorts have probably done more than anybody in recent years to revive the protest dimensions of the struggle. And I think we will see this kind of thing accelerate and escalate. It will involve not only blacks who are in pursuit of simple justice, it will also involve people who are concerned about military madness and nuclear insanity. I think we will see the formation of new creative coalitions that have not existed for a long time.
Yeah, do you have the feeling that, for example, the very heavy military expenditures are also are deeply linked with social policies of the government and must be protested
There's
together?
no question about it. We are dealing in some ways with something that smacks of the demonic. And this mad ethic that expresses itself in Central America. I read only this morning that the most extensive covert action on the part of the CIA in many years is about to commence in Central America. And all of this affects suffering peoples in this land in the most debilitating ways. And but fortunately, I see evidences of creative response to this kind of behavior.
You find it in your own congregation, and in do you find it also generally in the clergy?
Yes, unfortunately, my brothers and sisters in the clergy are often the last people to respond properly. It was said by one of Henry Ward Beecher's colleagues that Dr. Beecher was always correct on an issue, but always a little late. And unfortunately, many clerics lag behind, well, the people, so to speak. You heard about the preacher who was going to preach somewhere, and his choir was coming with him, but they went ahead of him on the bus, and he rolled into a gasoline station and asked, did anybody see a bus come through? Yes. The attendant said yes. He said, well, they're my people, and I'm trying to catch up with them.
That's one of the unique things about Bethany, and that is that Bethany has always been concerned with doing the king's business in the Empire City. And Dr. Jones is not only a priest, but he's also a prophet, a man who is willing to speak to issues that affect and impinge upon the lives of black people and suffering people, not only in New York City, but in New York State and this nation. And he has a worldview. And Bethany is that type of caring church.
Reverend George, let me ask you a few questions about yourself. You have, in your own background, you have social work, some social work training. Does that have an important influence in the way you conduct your ministry at Bethany?
Certainly it does. The church must also be concerned with dealing with things that impact and impinge upon the physical bodies of people in our nation. We know that black youth are twice as likely to die as white youth, and therefore one must have a social conscience in terms of dealing with the lives of oppressed people in New York City and this nation. My social work training and my experience in corrections for 6 years gives me an appreciation for the hurt and the pain that exist in our country. And I take that attitude in my ministry.
And so part of it is expressed through through Harvest Manor, and you're working with the young people there.
Certainly, we have a number of young people who have an opportunity to develop training in terms of relating to the public, as well as learning how to save and be productive citizens. And we are encouraging that through their training and development and work skills at Harvest Manor.
Obviously, one of the things that moves you are the very startling and terrible statistics of unemployment among black youth. I mean,
certainly.
Just unconscionable.
Certainly,
really.
that is true.
And I assume that the church is concerned to address that issue too directly.
Absolutely.
And
yeah, I'm committed to a posture of self-help and economic independence. I think that every church ought to be a kind of reservation headquarters to which people can repair with whatever aileth them. And I think that we have to utilize as best we can all of the resources that are available to us. So, in a word, we have both a prophetic and a priestly function. A priestly function to the victims, a prophetic function in terms of the victimizers.
the notion of self-help sometimes feeds the kind of policies that Reagan is very closely identified with, sort of people scrambling up on their own, pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps or something of that sort. That's not something I think finally you would agree with, though, is it?
No, not in the final sense. But I think what we have here is the flip side of one coin. Government has a responsibility to all citizens, and there are functions that government can and must perform that individuals and corporate bodies such as congregations cannot perform. But I think all of us have to brighten the corner where we are and at the same time demand that government carry out its responsibilities on a fair and equitable basis. For so long in this country, we have had capitalism for the poor and socialism for the rich. You know, look at the Chrysler bailout, for example. That was one of the best expressions of welfare that we have witnessed in recent times. The problem with Reaganomics is its basic insensitivity to the crying needs of poor people. The latest statistics show that the unemployment figures went down significantly in a 1 month period by 1.2 million. but there was no change at all in the black unemployment rate. In fact, it grew worse for black teenagers. So that says something about the posture of those who are in high places.
Since I've been in your church and heard you preach, I know you're a powerful preacher and a voice that's not likely to stop quiet soon.
You're very kind, Jim.
And I'm really delighted you were able to be with us this morning. I'm sorry we've run out of time. There are many more things I'd like to discuss with you.
See you at Harvest Mountain.
I will be there, and I urge the public to go there too, by the way. It's a lovely restaurant. It's just off Eastern.
1040 St. John's Place.
1040 St. John's Place. Thank you. Thank you, Reverend George, for being with us, and
Thank
Dr.
you.
Jones.
Thank you,
And thank you all for joining us. Please do plan to be with us again next week.
Our guests on The Way to Go were Reverend William A. Jones, pastor of Bethany Baptist Church and president of the National Black Pastors Conference, and Reverend Darrell George, assistant to the pastor, Bethany Baptist Church. Your host on The Way to Go was Dr. James P. Carse, professor of religion at New York University. The Way to Go is a community service of WCBS TV in cooperation with the American Baptist Churches of Metropolitan New York.